What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 40 of Retro Buyer's Guide. I'm Mike, and today we're going to be taking a look at 5 fantastic Disney games. Now, these are retro games based on Disney properties, and 5 of my favorites. I also think some of these are ones that don't get mentioned a whole lot when people do top Disney game lists. So hopefully there'll be some in there that you haven't seen before or thought about. So let's take a look.
So the first game I want to talk about is Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse for the Sega Genesis. Basically, Minnie and Mickey are on a date, and the evil witch Miserable comes along to snatch up Minnie, which sends Mickey on a quest to rescue her. Pretty basic stuff, but the gameplay is actually really fun. Castle of Illusion is a side-scrolling platformer that's easily one of the best on the Sega Genesis. Mickey controls well, and the level design is interesting and unique. Mickey has 2 different ways of dispatching bad guys. You get 1 consumable throwing item, and he can also land on the enemies with his rear by pressing the jump button twice, which also allows him to bounce and gain some extra height. Using this game mechanic can sometimes allow you to get to secret areas that are hidden away. While the game is filled with cutesy-looking sprites, including Mickey, this is no pushover. It's actually quite challenging in the later levels. I particularly remember having quite a lot of trouble defeating the last boss, Miserable, when I played this back in the day. This is not just a good Disney game, this is just a great game on the Sega Genesis period, and it's a reasonably priced one, usually costing anywhere from $15 on the low end to $25 on the high end, so definitely pick a copy of this up if you can get your hands on it. Now, a lot of people will put the original DuckTales on their list of best Disney games, but I wanted to talk about DuckTales 2 because it's a great game that doesn't often get mentioned. It is a very late release in the NES lifecycle. It came out in 1993 when a lot of kids had already moved on to the Super Nintendo, so they weren't begging Mom and Dad for DuckTales 2, which is a shame because DuckTales 2 is actually a really great game. Just like the original, you control Scrooge McDuck on a quest to scour the globe for all of the world's priceless treasures so you can hoard them in your own personal bank vault.
That belongs in a museum!
The gameplay is pretty much identical to the original, but there are some new gameplay mechanics. You can get upgrades for your cane, you can also use your cane to pull switches, and more importantly, the use of the cane has been streamlined, so instead of having to hit down and B once you jump to use the cane, you can now just hit B, which is a welcome change. If you enjoyed the first DuckTales game, you're definitely going to love this one. There's lots of treasure to collect and all kinds of secrets to discover. The only problem is going to be getting your hands on a copy because it's so rare. It costs $150 usually, is about the average. So do yourself a favor and pick up a version for the Famicom, which is usually only about $50. Let me tell you something about Capcom in the NES era. They were on fire. Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers 2 was also a late NES release, and much like DuckTales 2, it's also a rare game and a good game. It's a lot like the original Rescue Rangers, so if you enjoyed that game, it's more of that. It features all the characters from the Rescue Rangers cartoon, including Gadget, who I suspect sent a lot of people on their path to becoming a furry. The game is a side-scrolling platformer. You control Chip or Dale, which you get to select from at the beginning. You can pick up boxes to throw them at enemies, and you make your way to the end of the level collecting the RR symbols, which will allow you to access a bonus game. You'll get plenty of help from the other Rescue Rangers characters, and there are some pretty cool boss fights. While it's not quite as good as the original Rescue Rangers, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers 2 is certainly worth playing, but again, like DuckTales 2, the US version is very, very expensive, and the Famicom version's not that much better, so you may want to play this one through an emulator or a flash card, because there's no digital version that you can buy that I know of. Like I said earlier, Capcom could not be stopped in the 90s during the NES era, and they also made Darkwing Duck, which was built on the same engine they used to make Mega Man 5. Fun fact! And just like Mega Man 5, you can select which stage you want to take on first in which order. It's a side-scrolling platformer where you make your way across to get to the end boss. Darkwing Duck has a couple of different game mechanics. Firstly, you can latch onto platformers from underneath and jump up to them whenever you like. Secondly, Darkwing Duck can make use of 3 different weapons that he will come across in each level, which each have a different use. The game itself is pretty challenging and requires a lot of pattern memorization to get past the different boss fights. It definitely requires a fair amount of patience to get used to the controls when you first start out. Though it was also released somewhat late in the NES lifecycle, it's not quite as rare as DuckTales 2 or Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers 2, so it doesn't cost quite as much on the collector's market. Generally, Darkwing Duck can be picked up for about $50. Finally, we have Tailspin for the NES, also developed by Capcom, no surprise there. This is kind of an outlier on this list because this is not a side-scrolling platformer, which I kind of expected when I put it in for the first time. Tailspin is actually a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, and it's a pretty difficult one at that. The main gimmick here is you can press the A button, which will allow you to flip upside down and go the opposite direction on the screen. However, most of the time when I tried to use it to go back and get an item or something, I usually ended up dying, so I used it pretty sparingly. There's also an upgrade you can get that will allow you to shoot more than just one shot per screen, which was helpful but not exactly easy to get. Though I wasn't able to get too far, I did enjoy this game, and I definitely wanted to include it on the list because I feel like this one often gets overlooked when people are making lists of NES games, and I think it's a pretty fun one. And because it's not in high demand, it still tends to be moderately priced at around $15 to $30. Alright guys, that is going to do it for episode 40 of Retro Buyer's Guide. Thanks so much for hanging out, watching the videos that I work on. I really appreciate all the new subscribers. Thanks guys so much. Keep watching, keep liking, keep subscribing. Thanks so much. Alright, until the next video, happy collecting.